now the recovery is underway. And I was wondering, Commissioner, whether you can share with us your views on how did the policy response work, both at the national level and the EU level. So what role has it played in fostering this recovery, and how do you see the recovery going forward? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gian Maria. Thank you, David and Brookings, for this opportunity. Well, if we look behind us, I think we had in the European Union a quite fast and strong reaction. I have to say, completely different from the one we had in the previous crisis, the financial crisis. You know that the main decisions, at least three very important decisions, were taken in mid-March. So after 1 week of the declaration of the pandemic, we had the European Central Bank deciding for its purchase program, and the Commission deciding to suspend the Stability and Growth Pact and to suspend our state aid rules. These three decisions allowed a tremendous effort from member states, putting a lot of money in the table to avoid bankruptcies, crisis in labor market, and to face the pandemic. Then we had a second period where unprecedented common initiatives based on common issuance of European debt were taken, first for a support to short-term work schemes, 100 billion, and then for the recovery program, around 800 billion euro. So overall, we delivered apart the European budget, something around 1 trillion euro in extraordinary supportive measures. Result, I think we had a deep recession in 2020, 6.4 in the EU. We had a difficult beginning of the vaccination campaign in January, February this year. But then now we can say at least two optimistic things. First, vaccination campaign is quite strong. We are now over 75% of fully vaccinated. And after a difficult beginning, we are now probably the more advanced area in the developed world for vaccination. And second, the outlook for our growth is quite coherent with the one that the IMF published a couple of days ago. As you may remember, they had for the euro area a 5% growth for this year, slightly higher than the one that they had in their July forecast. This, of course, is the positive part of the story. So big success in vaccination. I say big success because we had common procurement of vaccine, which is completely unprecedented. So vaccines were acquired by Brussels and distributed to member states. And good figures for growth. Of course, we all know that we have increasing risks in this very positive outlook, but maybe, Gian Maria, we can enter in these risks with your following questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Maybe, we can delve into these issues in two stages. It would be great to hear your views on the risks that you see, the prospects and the risks for the recovery, say, over the next year and a half or so. But then later also your views on how this policy response could help shape the medium-term outlook for the euro area. And I have in mind in particular the prospects for reducing divergence, increasing convergence across countries, given the very asymmetric impact of the pandemic across Europe and across the Eurozone. Thank you.
Yes. Well, risks. We had several discussions in these days in the IMF meetings about these risks. Well, broadly, we can say that we have three kind of risks, among others. First, risks in our supply chains that are particularly important in the European Union, in some industrial sectors, and namely in motor vehicles, machinery, plastic, wood. These are among sectors more affected by bottlenecks in their supply chains. And second, some risks also in construction sector. Of course, not so high risks of bottlenecks and on supply chains in the services sector until now. This is the first one. I mean, still in a framework of industrial production rebounding very strongly, not so strongly in September as in July, but still very, very high level. Second risks are risks connected to this and to the spike in energy prices, risks of inflation. I think these risks are, for the moment in Europe, lower than in United States. You know that we had a 3.4 inflation level in the last September, and this should continue to remain high this year, and probably ease next year, going down. For the moment, we don't see secondary effects of this increase of inflation, referring to wages, labor market. So this is what the mainstream opinion in Europe define mostly a temporary phenomenon, but for sure we have also some structural elements that we have to look at, and the spike in energy prices is politically difficult to manage. It's the first big hurdle in the path of the climate transition. And of course, we should not downsize our ambition for the climate transition in this very first hurdle, but we have to face it, to manage it, to respond. Then we have the third range of risks connected to the fact that a lot of spending is going on and the level of the debt is higher. We have now in the euro area 100% of debt in average, which is 10 to 15 points higher than before the crisis. I repeat, all these risks are the downside part of a still positive outlook. We should not, in my opinion, shift from maybe excessive enthusiasm to pessimism, because many of these phenomena are connected to the strong recovery which is underway. And this is, I think, a reality. These risks are not shadowing the big opportunities. We can enter on the subject in following question, but that, just to summarize with one word, I think that the challenge for the European Union is how to find ways that what we are experiencing is not only a rebound, bringing us to the previous situation, but is something that gives to the European Union a more durable and sustainable growth, and a way out from the period that we define the low for long period of the European economy. This opportunity is there, and I think the challenge is to seize it.
Thank you. You really, you anticipated my follow-up on this, and we can really see the recovery under two lenses. I think the first one, which is more short-term, is the reopening, restarting activities that had to be curtailed, and that aspect clearly goes hand in hand with the successful vaccination campaign that you highlighted. That's how you allow these activities to restart. And clearly policy can help in supporting sectors throughout this period and easing their restart. But then there is a second aspect which has to do with the needed resource reallocation, something we actually don't know that well, but it's clearly important in a number of dimensions. Some may be pandemic induced. Think the remote work aspect, digitalization more generally, certainly accelerating that trend. But the second is the greening of the economy and the big policy effort in that direction. So maybe you can tell us a bit how you see the role of the EU policy initiatives in fostering this second leg of the recovery more into the medium term, which is the resource reallocation, the fostering convergence across countries. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. I think the crisis response went overall well, as we said until now. Situation is quite different from what we expected. We, for example, expected wave of bankruptcies and massive unemployment, and the crisis response avoided these things. But now we have a labor market with different problems, unemployment in some areas and shortage of labor in other areas. and we had the need to go out of support to companies. We had in Europe the lower level of bankruptcies since 10 years. But this support should be now, of course, should become more selective, etc. This for the crisis response. For the midterm, I think we have clearly indicated, at least for the common European money, these 800 billion priorities. The number one priority is the green transition, and more or less 40% of these national plans are dedicated to investments on the greening of the economies. Second, the digital transition, and third, what we call the resilience of the society, the healthcare system, etc., etc. This, I think, is a very good outcome of this unprecedented fact that European fiscal policy have some firepower, not only many rules, but also money and this money, of course, is given to member states if some priorities and criteria are fully respected. Implementation will be a challenge, especially for countries receiving larger amounts of money. What happens after this extraordinary supportive period also will be a challenge, because indeed we will have this year the 3.5% to GDP of public investment, which is the higher level since years in Europe, but this is connected to these extraordinary programs. What will happen in the next 10 to 20 years? How will we face the need of investment of the green transition? All this is more open to debate and brings us to a classic of the European discussion, which is the fiscal rules that we will, of course, discuss in the next months.
So, Gian Maria, there's a relevant question to that from Lorenzo Forni. He asked, Commissioner, the latest Italian government plan foresees a fiscal deficit of 3.3% of GDP in 2024. Does this point to a reduced need for reform of the Stability and Growth Pact? And how do you think about changing the Stability and Growth Pact going forward?
Well, as you know, we suspended with something that we call the General Escape Clause, the pact in March 2020, and this General Escape Clause will remain into force until the end of next year. Then the Commission will relaunch the public consultation on the review of the pact in the next days, and with the intention to table our ideas and proposal, of course, before the expiring of this General Escape Clause, so to steer the transition period. Of course, these proposals are not yet in our pockets. They are strongly dependent from the possibility to build consensus among different point of views in the European Union. What I can say is that we have clear in mind the three issues that we should deal with. One is, if possible, simplification of these fiscal rules that are quite complicated and not always enforceable. Second, how we can be able to facilitate public investment. We can't repeat what happened with the previous crisis. With the previous crisis, at the end of the previous decade, the net public investment in the EU was zero. If you have net public investment at zero, you will not crowd private investment and you will not have the climate transition. So how to facilitate investment is the second chapter. And the third chapter is how to deal with this higher level of debt, of course, because we know that we have a 60% debt to GDP threshold in our treaties. The treaties were decided at the time when 60% was the average debt of the European countries. And now in the euro area, the average is not 60, but 100. This doesn't mean that we will, as Commission, propose to change the treaties, not at all. By the way, we are defined the guardian of the treaties. If someone wants to change the treaties, this is not for the European Commission to propose. But we can deal in a gradual and flexible way with these rules. Otherwise, if we go, so to say, back to normal, either we will not be able to enforce these rules or we will find very difficult situations having this higher debt after the pandemic.
John Marie, I don't see another question, so the floor is yours for a few more minutes.
Yes, I saw there was another question, but it looks as if it's in line with what Lorenzo was asking, and I think it's been answered. Maybe for the last question, I would quickly stretch beyond the boundaries of the European Union to ask you about the agreement on international taxation that was reached recently. Could it be an important milestone? It's clearly, there is a range of countries in the European Union, some Luxembourg, Ireland, Netherlands, that have been heavy recipients of transit flows driven by regulatory taxation reasons. How do you see this agreement playing out? Clearly, a lot has still to be done, ratifications in individual countries and the like, but do you see it potentially as an important milestone in strengthening international cooperation on this front? Or do you fear that this may just get lost in the sea of ratifications that would be needed to have it binding? Thank you.
Well, I am confident that we will implement. The OECD is committed to deliver in November the so-called model rules for the implementation of this agreement. And for the Commission, I can say that we will swiftly adopt a proposal of directive to transpose this agreement in the EU legislation with the target of doing so in the first semester of next year. I mean, this is referred, of course, to what is called the Pillar 2, so the agreement on the 15% minimal corporate taxation. The Pillar 1, we are legally scrutinizing if a European directive is needed or if it is only something that member state could join separately. as a international agreement. But all in all, I think this is, well, everyone used the word historic. We could refrain from using it, but at least say extraordinarily important. And I think we should recognize that this would not have been possible without the new US administration and Janet Yellen role in particular, because this story was going on since 6-7 years without any agreement. And then in the last 6 months, 7 months, we were able to reach the agreement. I am quite proud of the fact that all 27 member states of the Union are in the agreement. And you know that for some countries, it was not easy at all, especially, for example, Ireland, to join this agreement. Of course, this will not mean that we will have the same minimal corporate taxation in Europe, because many countries have much higher than 15% corporate, but we will limit the unfair competition. We will limit the tendency, what we call the race to the bottom, and we will have a better level playing field among all the players in the world. So I think very, very important step. And also the other pillar, the fact that you reallocate taxing rights basing on where profits are done and not based on where headquarters are established, is also such an important principle. So without exaggeration, I think that this was really a turning point, and citizens are expecting from us that we have not only a political agreement, that we implement it. And we are committed to do this by 2023. It will be a rush to get there, but I think we will get there by 2023.
Great. Thank you, John Maria, and thank you, Commissioner. I now want to turn it over to the foreign policy part of our discussion with Tom Wright. Tom is the director of our Center on United States and Europe, and I'm in the book promotion business myself, so I want to call attention to his new book, Aftershocks, Pandemic Politics and the End of the Old International Order, which was published recently and has been getting very favorable reviews. So Tom, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David, and it's a great pleasure to be doing this with you and Jean Maria, and Commissioner. Welcome back to Brookings. So if I could start out, and please do everyone put questions in the chat or come in and we with interventions at any point. We're at an interesting moment in transatlantic relations. Your colleague Thierry Bridon said there's a growing feeling that something is broken in transatlantic relations, and recently called for a pause and a reset. And Charles Michel, the president of the EU Council, said in reference to President Biden's catchphrase, "What does it mean America is back? Is America back in America or someplace else? We don't know. We are observing a clear lack of transparency and loyalty." And that was all said after AUKUS, but since Afghanistan, AUKUS, the travel ban, which has announced it will be lifted but still isn't lifted, there does seem to be some frustration in Europe and in the EU in particular, at the United States. So how does this look from your perspective? How do you assess sort of where we are, and if there needs to be a reset, what form should it take?
Well, thank you, Tom, for being here and for your question. I think we should look to this issue with a little bit longer view. And the longer view is clearly that from the European Union position, the new Biden administration is an extraordinary change for good, especially because of the clear commitment and message on multilateralism. Multilateralism appeared to be old-fashioned, if not dead, in some political messages. Now, I would say multilateralism is back, and what we were just commenting with Gian Maria, this agreement on the taxation, is a good example from this point of view. Then, of course, we know that we experienced two different episodes, one particularly difficult to accept from France, the deal on submarine and the AUKUS story, but also in general perceived in Europe as a lack of good communication among partners. This story, and more importantly, I think also the conclusion of the Afghan missions reinforced awareness in the European Union of the need to try to play a more important geopolitical role. The point is this a problem, a difficulty, or a concern for our American friends, or is it an opportunity also for United States? My view is that being clear, at least since 10 years, that America is strongly committed in NATO and concentrated in the Pacific area. The fact that the EU could acquire some geopolitical weight in some areas that are very important for Europe, like Mediterranean, North Africa, the Balkans. This should be considered good news for NATO and for the US-EU partnership. The problem is, will we be able, the Europeans, to deliver and to take these decisions? Because, as you know, we are talking of European defense since maybe 20 years, and the progress are still very limited. But I think this is not something that should create difficulties, but that we should look as a mutual reinforcement. We are in the same page in addressing the China challenge. We are strongly committed in the function of NATO, especially towards Russia. We develop an autonomous geopolitical weight in some areas around Europe, also because I think the American idea is not to be concentrated in this.
Thank you. Just you mentioned China, at the end. The EU, as of a few years ago, had a China strategy that sort of divided relations with China into partnership, competition and rivalry. And EU officials have been pretty clear that they want to, continue to work and engage with China on shared transnational problems like climate change and pandemics, and also, of course, the global economy. But in recent months, the Chinese leadership has made it pretty clear that they don't believe that the West should be able to fit different issues into different compartments, and that if we want to cooperate with China on shared challenges, we, in their terms, need to create the conditions for cooperation, which means, a thawing of relations or an easing of pressure on Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and other sort of contentious issues. How do you and how does the EU sort of see this message from China, and how worried are you that there will be a breakdown in cooperation because China is making it conditional on geopolitical concessions?
Yes. Well, I think we are perfectly aware of the challenging risks that are there. The model of so to say, an authoritarian model where economic success is not coupled with democracy as we know it. This challenge is a challenge that Europe has to face, and we know that this challenge is also a challenge that could have some impact also in some aspects of our European political landscape. The model of a capitalism without full respect of rule of law and democratic rules. So this is for sure something we are in the same page with our American friends and allies. The effort of the EU is to try to support at the same time the potentiality of an open economy, open trade, avoiding negative economic consequences of a decoupling or a closure of this international economic relations. Well, this double track is challenging, not easy, of course. For example, if you look to the supply chains that are now very important in the crisis we are facing, of course, we need as Europeans to address our dependency from other players, not only China, but in some cases Russia, and take care of our autonomy in some strategic supply chains without this meaning a break in international trade relation, and without this meaning the impossibility to cooperate on the climate transition. It's a big challenge, as you said before. But what alternative do we have? We are, I think, obliged to stay and defend our values, and at the same time, we have to cooperate to tackle climate change, and we are interested in trade and open economy. Could these things go on together? This is a challenge, but I don't think we can accept the idea that no cooperation is possible on climate change, and that defending our autonomy means disrupting all the trade, the global trade economy.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, here, you know, the United States obviously has had a tougher approach to China over the last few years, but on the business side, investment, you know, has been actually dramatically increasing, and people have noticed this sort of twin track between the political, military, diplomatic side on the one hand and the business Wall Street side on the other hand. But in parallel with that, over the last year or so, there's been a very notable crackdown on business, and particularly big tech, you know, inside China, on major, you know, companies sort of transforming the landscape. Are you sort of worried by those developments in China? What do you think the implications of them are? And do you still sort of think, as you know, senior officials here said, their job is still to get access for US companies, you know, in China? How do you see that sort of economic, financial interdependency between the EU and China at the moment, given what's happening on the regulatory and sort of political side in Beijing?
Things have changed in the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe 5 years ago, the message from Europe was, doing business, asking for level playing field, supporting our companies in this in China. Then I think the lesson of the reality showed us that we need to strengthen our political position if we want to keep open the doors for trade and investment. I don't know if we were too open or too weak in the past years, or if the situation has changed also in China. But for sure now we still pursue economic relation, investments, but we pretend a different attitude from the Chinese authorities.
Thank you. We have a question from Julia Freelander. Sorry, Julia served in the Trump administration in the National Security Council and in the Treasury Department. She asked, how much do you assess that supply chain problems and trade tensions will force EU member states to reconsider export dependencies, especially as countries implement this year's fiscal assistance? So basically, with these supply chain problems, does that encourage more self-reliance or even protectionism? How do you think this is going to play out, especially as we head into the winter?
I think we need to strike a not easy balance, but this is what we have to do. From one side, without disrupting the EU economic model, the single market, the open economy, the competition, blah, blah, blah. But on the other side, we need to, and this is for the first time in the EU experience, to adopt industrial policies looking to supply chains and making EU more independent from the supply chain's point of view. And this is related to, of course, gas supply. You know that we are importing 90% of our gas in the EU. This means semiconductors. This means other raw materials. This means also the pharma and healthcare supply chains. So there are some strategic sectors where the Commission is finally working after years of difficulty even in mentioning the industrial policy word to defend our autonomy. But this in balance with the fact that the single market remain an open economy based on competition. And we have to do this, of course, with our trade partners all over the world, but especially with like-minded friends.
Thank you. And thank you, Julia, for the question. Commissioner, on Brexit, you know, we've seen, I'm not going to ask you about the details of the negotiations this week, because I know you won't be able to discuss it, you know, that much. But the overall picture is really of a deteriorating relationship between the EU and the UK. You know, there's a possibility this all ends up in an all-out trade war. Even without that, we look set for a very protracted period of, you know, difficult sort of exchange with distrust on both sides, not just over the interpretation of the agreement, but also just over other political and diplomatic issues. How worried are you, you know, about EU-UK relations at the moment and where it's headed? I'm worried, but
I would not exaggerate this concern, providing one thing. I would not exaggerate because we all knew, and our British friends knew much more than us, that a decision was taken and that this decision would have caused difficulties. It was not our decision, it was the British people decision. But of course, after decades in a single market, if you leave it, you will have to face problems. These problems are manageable, I think, with goodwill from both parts, with good words also from our American partners that, of course, are very interested to avoid these tensions. I would say, provided that we avoid to use in a negative way the Northern Ireland situation, because this is a problem of different nature. It was very difficult to reach this Northern Ireland Protocol. It was reached on the basis of a UK proposal that the Commission accepted. Of course, we can make things flexible. I know perfectly well the problem because I'm also responsible for customs, and you can imagine how difficult is the customs issue in Northern Ireland. But we recently proposed easing of customs control in a very, very high and ambitious way. So we have a lot of things that we can address, but we can't cancel and attack this Northern Ireland Protocol without causing dangerous political consequences, more than with EU in Ireland. And I think this is not the right thing to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. So I'd like to move to COVID, which we haven't mentioned yet. And of course, the EU, has been exporting vaccines to the rest of the world, and the United States and the EU are now working closely together on trying to vaccinate the world. There's obviously at least a two-track two-speed, approach over the course of the last, year. Much of the world remains unvaccinated. The EU is committed, previous to September, I think, to donate 450 million doses. They committed again to commit another 500 million. The United States is committed to about the same, I think, about 1 billion doses of the vaccine, but only 28 million doses as of September were shipped from the EU, and a tiny fraction of the percentage that was committed has been distributed. So how should we sort of think about this? How salient an issue is this in the EU, and how much more do you think the United States and the EU need to do together, to actually ensure that there are vaccines that go into the arms of billions of people around the world, keeping in mind that the WHO estimates that we need 11 billion vaccine doses to get to 70%, even what we've jointly committed, it comes to about 20% of the total, and then only a fraction of that so far has actually gone out to the people who need it.
Yes, I think this is probably and incredibly the more urgent need for the global economy, and also, in theory, the easiest to be addressed, because we are no more in the situation we were a few months ago of shortage of doses all around the world. Figures from the EU, we introduced a mechanism of authorization of export from the European Union in last March, if I remember well, and up to now we authorized export from the EU of 800 million doses, which is more than the 700 million doses that have been distributed in this period to European citizens. The problem is that these doses are not reaching especially the low-income countries. And here I think that we need to multiply our efforts. I saw also in these very days, and I hope the next G20 in Rome at the end of this month will be a turning point, an increase of commitments from different advanced economies. We should be, I think, more ambitious, and we can do that. It's not, we are not talking of hundreds of billions. We are talking of dozens of billions. But I have to say that the EU Commission and member states, after a difficult beginning, are not lagging behind now. They are active.
Yeah, if I could just follow up though, I mean, it just seems to me that we look at, we're looking at the sort of global vaccination effort in sort of two ways. One is this development assistance, are we doing more than we used to? And also relative to each other, is the EU doing as much as the United States and vice versa? But this is in some ways, just the latest front in an existential struggle against this pandemic. And I'm wondering, do you think it's possible for senior officials in Europe or the United States to make the case to the populations of their countries that we need to be spending potentially hundreds of billions, of dollars on this, or at least tens of billions, in order to, avert an economic cost, which is estimated in the trillions of dollars over the next sort of 5 or 10 years, if we don't contain and defeat the pandemic? And how do we shift from seeing this as a matter of development assistance to actually seeing it as something that is sort of existential for us?
Well, I think that the message, nobody is safe until everybody is safe, is not so difficult to understand. We are now in a quite good situation in Europe and also in the US. More recently, the new wave of the pandemic are slowing down very seriously. Vaccination is working, and the costs, at least based on the estimates of the IMF, to give a strong contribution to solving these problems are costs of not of hundreds of billions.
Right.
So they are affordable for our economies if it is clear that it is not only for reason of solidarity, but it is also for reason of the well-being of our economies. So for the well-being of our economies, we need to address globally the vaccination campaign. And also, if I may say this, we need to accelerate our cooperation on easing traveling rules and this kind of things. We had in the EU a great story with this green certificate. I have one in my pocket, and this thing is used by more than 400 million European citizens. I have a Belgian one. I am Italian, and I travel all over Europe. And I go to restaurants and theaters all over Europe with the same QR code. I think we should, among not only help emerging and low-income countries, but we should increase and facilitate exchanges and travel among developed countries. It is the time now, I think.
Commissioner, thank you very much. That's a great note to end on, and we're out of time, I think, David, so I will turn it back over to you.
Right. I just want to thank the Commissioner for joining us this morning, and glad that your European passport, your COVID passport, allowed you to come to Washington in person. I look forward to more in-person events in the not too distant future. I want to thank John Maria and Tom for such excellent questioning, and for everybody from dialing in. As I mentioned in the chat, this was on the record, and we have a recording which we'll post the link to at some point when we have it rendered properly. So with that, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a productive day.
Thank you very much. Grazie.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.